Support for WUWM podcast comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Pewaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
Lake Effect brings you conversations about what's happening in Milwaukee and the people, places, and organizations that shape the community. This is Lake Effect Spotlight from WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.
College instructors are facing quieter classrooms. Few questions, little debate between students, and not much feedback. Educators place some blame on the pandemic and virtual learning. Others point to social media. This class of college freshmen were born around 2006, so it's safe to say they've seen their fair share of people fighting online. Dr. Amelia Zurcher is trying to correct that. She launched a civic discourse curriculum 3 years ago to help teach students how to disagree with one another. WUWM education reporter Katherine Kokal spoke with her about the program and how disagreements about campus speech are taking shape.
Post-COVID, we certainly have thought a lot about, and also in our particular media landscape, where students are more and more online and less in person. So, it's hard to sort out what the pandemic did and what is just kind of the evolving media world that we're all in, media ecology that we're all in, what the differences there are. But in those spaces, we have definitely noticed that students aren't as interactive maybe as they had been in the past, and as willing to disagree, as willing to kind of dive into issues where they might expect disagreement. And often that gets framed very early as conflict rather than just exploration, curiosity, getting to know each other, and sitting with difference and thinking about how to talk through it, with it, around it, to engage right in it. So that was part of the issue. Also, one of the most interesting things about administration is you can really think about ways that education is meeting our social needs and ways that maybe we should be doing a better job. And I think it's indisputable that our public space, our civic space, is not healthy right now in some ways, right? It still does some things well, but anger is a really viral emotion. When you're in a media space where profit's really important, you're going to be foregrounding things that sell, that transmit really quickly. And so we've gotten into this space where polarization, as we all know, is a huge problem, where civic discourse is often not collaborative, and it's often not about solving problems. It's more about getting more likes, more hits, more attention, getting followers to follow you and click, right? So I think we had both the particular goal of serving students where they are now coming out of the pandemic and in our media landscape, but also thinking about how we contribute to the public sphere in a more robust way.
Oh, that's really interesting. And so how do you bring people out of their shell and be comfortable disagreeing without giving someone carte blanche to be inflammatory, hateful? How do you teach that? How do you go about teaching that in 2025?
I honestly think that students don't think of school as a place where they'd even consider, in most cases, being inflammatory and hateful. That doesn't mean that people don't say hurtful things all the time. We all do that. And, part of this is really helping students not to associate identity with what people say in conversation. Right? So people say wrong things all the time. We screw up, we change our minds. So it's part of that. But I would say that we haven't really struggled with hatefulness very much in this class. That hasn't really been an issue. They're really ready, again, to empathize and feel respect. The hard part comes when they realize that that's actually a very rigorous activity, that you can't just be nice and open your ears and then empathy and respect just come. That actually, to really feel that from someone else, the person has to really hear you and know you, right? So empathy and respect are easy if it's just a matter of 4 sentences that you hear from something and you're like, yeah, from somebody, and you think, yeah, that's great, I empathize with you and I totally respect you. But when you get down to the real underneath, you have to actually really engage to get to that space. So that's part of it. But I would say that the most important thing that we can do to help students get to a place where they're having actually constructive dialogue is to practice skills. And I think that that's counterintuitive. People, it's like kids say they're not math people. They also say, oh, I'm just an introvert, or I'm not really good at conflict, or I'm not really good at, those kinds of conversations. And again, what we want to say from the beginning is nobody is, right? We all learn. These are really fundamental skills that we don't get taught a lot of the time. And so we all have to learn to do this. And so we do things like we do little mini debate practices at the very beginning of the semester, where students just have to take 60 seconds and disagree with each other over a point. And then it's like we time them and then we go, okay, 60 seconds more, disagree again, just for the activity of practicing that to start feeling comfortable with it.
I see what you mean there because you're teaching someone how to not shut down, right?
If someone disagrees with you, that's not the end of the story. That's the beginning. Because imagine what you could learn, we say, from somebody that totally disagrees with you. You could learn all sorts of things, right? The person doesn't just come to that disagreement from nowhere. They have this whole history of life experiences and perspectives, people in their lives, things that have happened to them. And so to get curious about why a person thinks that and how they came to that idea, that's a mark of enormous respect, even if you never agree. You can, right? Actually totally respect somebody and not agree with them. And that seems often quite surprising to them at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
I
things
also,
change over the semester.
and I would say too that there's even a more, what you said, that it's to help people not shut down. I think that's absolutely right. But I think there's also an academic aspect to that, in that very often the way we've done school for a lot of students isn't to let them follow thoughts with other people. It's more like, here's the answer, here's the content, memorize this content, learn this answer, and then give it back on a test. And so they don't associate learning with an open space without a lot of structure that they have to make. That's really important for a professional context too, right?
Yeah.
When you get into a job, it's not like people, well, some jobs, but there's a lot of work that people do where it is an open space and you figure out what that space needs.
Yeah. It's like, oh, I need to have an opinion about this. I'm actually being paid to
Yeah,
have an
right.
opinion about this and to make this work better. Yeah. What types of like can you give a couple examples of the issues? I'm trying to picture how you
Yeah.
start a session and it's like, okay, today we're going to solve Medicare fraud.
Oh,
Like
yeah, no.
what?
That's actually a great question. I think so the first time that I ever taught this course was in fall 23 with my colleague Amber Wachowski, who's now gone to Madison. We were the two that first cooked up this full idea and wrote the grant together. And we did start way too big. We would say things like we would have a debate, deliberation on social inequality. I mean, we would say like,
Oh, great.
yeah. So what should we do about the fact that some people are making more and more and more money? What should we do? And we would have given them quite a bit of content. They watch TED Talks. They listen to podcasts as part of class. They read a lot of media, a lot of different media, things like Atlantic articles and stuff like that. So they have the ideas to give them stuff that they can use to have these conversations. But still, they were way too big. And we realized that the most important part of these debates and deliberations is that what should we do? We had to frame them in such a way that they could enter into them as part of the we pretty quickly. Like when you say to students, what should we do? About social inequality, it turns very quickly into that, well, they should do this, and they should do that, because they don't think of themselves as people solving that right now, right? So here's a good example. This is one of the questions that they actually voted on to discuss and had a brilliant discussion on. It was, what should we do about the drinking age? And they were so thoughtful and interesting on this. And that was because this is a topic they know about. They've heard adults talking about it. They've been talked to about it. It's something that they're really invested in. And so they had a lot of really interesting thoughts about, whether it was a good idea to lower it. They started getting into questions about, in all the groups did, because I have the transcripts, into, well, but you can be in the military, but you can't drink. What they looked at things like what they do in Germany about the drinking age. So they got really thoughtful and interesting. That would be a great example. Another one would be artificial intelligence. And we had a great deliberation on what should we do about the increasing prevalence of AI partners, romantic partners. And they were completely fascinated by that, right? And had
Oh,
many
I
different thoughts
bet.
about whether that be a good idea or a bad idea, we had a case on freedom of expression. And so we talked a lot about what should we do about controversial speakers on campus? What should we as a university community do? But then the we there becomes really multifaceted because they would think about, the administrator's perspective, faculty's perspective, undergraduate students, graduate students, staff, custodians, right? There's so many different things to think about when you consider who that we is that they're part of and what we as a university should do. So those are examples if that helps.
It absolutely does help. You touched on freedom of expression, but I think we're having this conversation in a time where people are really considering freedom of expression on campus. I mean, Charlie
Yeah.
Kirk was shot in one of these very high profile kind of debate me, prove me wrong type of scenarios that some colleges and universities have kind of banded together to not have on campus. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that you've had any conversations with students in this class about this, but like how do you look at this as someone who's trying to protect free speech and expression, but also thoughtful civic discourse?
Yeah. One of the topics that I've taught every single semester that I've taught this course is hate speech. Because it's so fascinating to students that it is illegal in most democracies, but not in ours. And just thinking about why that is and what the pros and cons are of legislating against hate speech is really, really interesting and starts helping people see the complexity of this. I would say that a couple things. This course is founded on what we in political science language call ill-structured problems, by which we mean simply problems that are really hard to solve. The polarization is really a almost absurd simplification in almost every case, right? That's not really how we get to solutions. We pick these ill-structured problems because just as important as learning these skills is making sure that we practice them in a space where we respect the complexity of problems and we understand that there's no way to take a position easily, right? There's no easy position ever. There's no position that we can just defend that we know is quickly right or wrong, which isn't to say that there's not kind of ethical lines that we want to find. But part of that is finding those ethical lines and thinking, okay, this is what I won't cross, but these are all the spaces where I would step across, right? And that takes a lot of discernment, to use a Jesuit word. It takes a lot of thought. It takes a lot of input from other people. And so freedom of speech is about making space for all of the speech to me. And I think that's part of what we're really trying to teach in this class. And sometimes that means speech we don't like. Sometimes that means very polarized speech. But really what we're talking about when we think about an ecosystem that is governed by a belief in freedom and a commitment to freedom of speech, it's about a really pluralist, multivocal discourse. And I think what we're trying to do here again is teach the skills, not for one side versus another side, but for a really multi-partial discourse. And that is freedom of speech.
Dr. Amelia Zurcher is the director of the honors program at Marquette University and launched the school's civic discourse curriculum. She spoke with WUWM education reporter Katherine Kokal.
You can find more interviews like this one by visiting wuwm.com/Lake Effect. And while you're there, subscribe to the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast.
Sources and methods, the crown jewels of the intelligence community. Shorthand for how do we know what's real? Who told us? If you have those answers, you're on the inside, and NPR wants to bring you there. From the Pentagon to the State Department to spy agencies, listen to understand what's really happening and what it means for you. Sources and Methods, the new national security podcast from NPR.